Sit down, do something. Okay. 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 All right. Good morning, folks online. Oh, you can see me. Nobody. Oh, okay. Okay, good. I can't see you if you're online, but I've been told you're there. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to introduce myself. We're all going to introduce ourselves, the people that are here, and then we will go ahead and start our presentation. Just my understanding of what we are supposed to be doing is gathering information about the current state of competency evaluations, restorations, those kinds of things, what's going on around the state, to gather information both for DBHDD, for concrete suggestions, and for some possible legislation in the future. So Commissioner Tanner, I hope that was accurate. Okay. And I'm very excited. We have a great group of folks that are here and that are involved. I'm a Superior Court judge, Kathy Goslin, and been doing this work for a long time, been a judge for 36 years. So, but I've had a competency docket for a long time, and so have worked closely with DBHDD over the years. And I'm excited about doing this work. So if we could start with the folks in the room, and you tell us who you are and what your role is today, and maybe what your experience with competency is. So can we start, Judge Johnson, with you?
Good morning, everyone. I am Kenya Johnson. I'm the Chief Probate Judge in Fulton County, and our court handles mental competency. We handle guardianships as well as orders to apprehend and involuntary commitment hearings.
Okay.
Morning, I'm Chris Van Rossum. I'm the Chief Assistant Public Defender in Hall County, Georgia. In addition to my caseload, I supervise our competency docket and have just had a lot of experience dealing with clients who have competency-related issues over the last 10 years. Been at the office for 10 years in August.
He also is the public defender in the mental health court, so is familiar with all the issues here.
My name is Eric Bruton, and I'm on the State Court of Cobb County, and I also supervise our DUI court.
Yes, Dr. Wright.
Good morning, Dr. Kiana Wright. I am the Assistant State Forensic Director over Community Services for DBHDD. Been with DBHDD since 2009, so have a lot of experience doing competency evals, and I oversee all pretrial evals in the community.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Patsy Porter, and I am a judge on the State Court of Fulton County. I preside over our misdemeanor mental health court along with Chief Magistrate Judge Cassandra Kirk. And I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Wright in helping us to come up with a competency evaluation form that we've been using in Fulton County the past couple of years. And it's made a big difference in how evaluations are done and when we receive those results. So good to see you, Dr. Wright.
My name is Emil Risby. I'm the medical director for DBHDD. And I'm also the acting state forensic director.
Back table. Tell us who you are back there.
Hello, I'm Chelsea Nabrit. I'm sorry if you can't hear me online, but I am with DBHDD. I'm the community outreach manager, and I'll be helping you all with the commission.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Ashley Dixon. I'm the liaison coordinator for the commission.
Yeah.
And you may need.
Commissioner Tanner.
I'm Kevin Tanner. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. I'm also the Chair of the Behavioral Health Reform and Innovation Commission.
And the folks in the audience, you want to introduce yourself so we know who you are? You can come up to the podium so everybody can hear who you are.
Good morning, Carol Caraballo, the Director for the Office of Adult Mental Health at DBHDD.
Morning, Michael Polachek, Director of Legislative Affairs for DBHDD.
Morning, everyone. Patrick Bielecki, Legislative Liaison. I've been with the agency for 2 years.
All right, our online folks.
Second here.
We're having the tech person doing the work here. So okay. Yeah, I'm going to look at Justin as our tech person who's sitting next to me. Thank goodness. So if you're online, Judge Friesman.
Hi, I'm Judge Penny Friesman. I'm a Superior Court judge from Savannah. Victoria, I see you're on here. I just saw you a minute ago, and we can't seem to stay away from each other. I'm doing, I do both the mental health court and I run our competency docket as well.
Who's next? I can't see. Dr. Oliver.
Good morning. I'm Julie Oliver. I am the Assistant State Forensic Director over Hospital Services. I've worked with DBHTD and forensics for the last 18 years at various hospitals and as a community evaluator.
Okay. Mr. Bullard.
Good morning. I'm Brandon Bullard. I'm a private criminal defense practitioner specializing in appellate and post-conviction matters. But before this life, I was both general counsel and appellate director for the Public Defender Council. And so I've seen competency from the defense side at all stages.
Okay, and you have a great radio voice. So, all right, Marilyn, and I didn't get. So, is it Leak or Leaky?
It's Leak, Marilyn Leak.
Marilyn, yes, Miss Leak, go
Good
ahead.
to see everybody. Marilyn Leak coming to you from the Council of State Governments Justice Center. So my colleague Hallie Fader-Tao is here too. And we are a national nonprofit and we worked with several states and counties on competency work. So here bringing sort of that national perspective.
Okay, thank you. And Hallie, it's good to see you too.
Likewise. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all.
All right, Judge Darsaw.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Darsaw, and I preside over a mental health substance abuse treatment court in Dougherty County, Georgia. And I'm pleased to be here.
Okay. Mr. Cranford, I don't see your picture. I mean, I don't see your face, but I see your name.
Yeah, hey, I'm on my phone, so I'll spare you the phone photograph. So I'm the DA in the Coweta Judicial Circuit, and hopefully, in addition to a prosecution perspective, I think I'll provide. We're a multi-county circuit. Out of the 50 circuits, we have the 4th highest felony caseload, the 5th highest population, but my smallest county has like 10,000 people. So we have 2 mental health courts throughout the circuit. Before that, I was an assistant DA from 2012 till 2018. So hopefully that's a little bit of different perspective than a lot of people have. Thanks.
Good, good. We're glad you're here. Judge Johnson, you're here, but your name just popped up on the, is that?
Oh,
okay. Okay. We also have somebody's media services. Who's that?
That's just
Is that you?
That's our office, just monitoring downstairs.
That's tech world.
That's right.
Okay. Is there anybody else that nobody else is on?
That's it.
Okay. All right. Then we are going to start. I think Commissioner Tanner was going to start us off.
Thank you again. And let me just, I want to say a few things, then I'm going to cover a little bit of information. There's Dr. Risby is going to come down and talk, but I'm going to go ahead and do item B and C under my tag there of opening presentation, just so that after I sit down, I won't have to worry. You won't have to worry about hearing from me again for a while. First of all, I want to thank each of you for your participation. You know, as someone who has served in the General Assembly and as someone who has chaired the Behavioral Health Reform Commission since it was started in 2019, and now as commissioner of this department, I can tell you that one of our biggest challenges that we're facing is the forensic population and the forensic backlog that we have in the state. And so many of you, whether you're a judge or a defense attorney or a prosecutor, you see the results of that backlog every day play out in your courtrooms, and we understand that. And the department recognizes that it's a challenge, that it's one that this current status quo is not acceptable to us, but it's going to take all hands on deck working to find solutions. As the chair of the Behavioral Health Reform and Innovation Commission, I have subcommittees that I appoint, and appoint the members are appointed by the whole commission by the Chief Superior Court, the Chief Supreme Court Justice of the state, by the governor, by the lieutenant governor, and the speaker. And then we have subcommittees, and one of those subcommittees is Courts and Corrections, and I appointed Justice Boggs to serve as chair of that subcommittee. And many of you he has recommended to serve on this advisory committee. I also, as the chair, have the ability to create advisory committees to the full commission, and that's what you're serving on here today. So our goal is at the end of your work, you'll be able to present a report to the full commission and come and present to the full commission. And the full commission then will take that work up and ultimately adopt your work as part of our overall annual report that we submit publicly. So we're excited about that. We have a lot going on at the department with DBHDD that we're working on. And I want to talk to you about just a couple of things, and then I'm going to ask some of our staff here to talk with you in more detail. But probably our number one biggest challenge, and you'll probably hear this from some of the other presenters that we face as a state, is workforce. We have a tremendous workforce challenge here in Georgia. At any given time, 15% of our hospital beds run offline because of workforce. We have a contract with Jackson Healthcare at our hospitals to provide nurses and other staff to supplement our staff because we're so short. We're spending around $1.6 million a week on that contract. So it's a tremendous cost to us and to the state. And we're still at a 15%, our beds offline. In addition to that, our crisis centers run by our community service board partners around the state also have a tremendous workforce challenge, and many of their beds are offline. So the system's just clogged down in a lot of ways. So we want you, as you go through this work, to take a look at how can we think about this differently? And I know you're going to hear from some very qualified panelists today who are going to talk to you both about the national view and what's happening here in Georgia and some of the things we're already doing in Georgia to try to help relieve this system. And going to workforce, one of the things that's currently underway, and we have a workforce subcommittee, the Behavioral Health Reform Commission. One of their recommendations in the report they submitted in December that became part of the full commission's report was to conduct a very in-depth workforce study around our DBHDD workforce, but also the workforce for our provider network, because we cannot function as a system if our providers are also not adequately staffed. So we have a company on board now, a third party that's working with us doing that work now, study. DOAS is also doing another study around workforce in general of state employees. So we're working hand in hand with both of those. So we're excited about the outcome of that work. We expect to get the results of our study in August, and those will be presented to the workforce subcommittee, and their recommendations ultimately will become part of the overall commission's work this year. One of the other things that the Access Subcommittee, who is chaired by Dr. Brenda Fitzgerald, many of you may, if you've been around, may know her. She's the former head of the Georgia Department of Public Health. She also was the head of the CDC at the federal level, but she chairs the work on the Access Subcommittee for the Behavioral Health Reform Commission. One of the recommendations that came out of that work was a bed study, because as the commissioner of the department, I'm not able to tell you today how many beds we actually need, where those beds should be located, and what kinds of beds we need. When you think about the forensic population, you generally think about an inpatient hospital bed only. The challenge, though, is if Serenity CSB, which runs a crisis unit in Augusta, Georgia, has a 16-bed crisis center, but because of workforce, they're only running 8 of those beds today, then that means those folks who are not able to go to the crisis center end up in our hospital taking a bed up that otherwise could have a forensic patient. So the whole system works together. So that is a recommendation. We have contracted with a group to come in and do a very in-depth bed study here in the state. The bed study is going to identify what types of beds we need, whether it's crisis, inpatient, outpatient, IDD for the intellectual disabled, detox, substance abuse, whatever it might be. Our goal is to really have a plan that we can lay out for the next 5 to 10 years that says, this is our bed needs to continue to address the growing need in the state. So that's underway. That work will also plan to be done in August. And those recommendations will be presented back to both DBHDD and to the Access Subcommittee, which again can become part of the overall package that goes to the governor and others in December. Our goal there is this will drive funding decisions for the future of the state around workforce and the bed study. DBHDD is also undertaking quite a few pilot programs that we believe that will help address some of this issue. So you're going to hear about some of that today. But I have asked our Dr. Risby, who introduced himself as Chief Medical Officer. I think it's important for you to know that he is over our hospitals. He's a forensic psychiatrist. He's an MD. He's a problem solver, but he has a challenge, and he's excited. He's a member of this committee, but he's excited about our work here because it will help relieve his stress every day from the phone calls he gets from judges and others across the state because they're frustrated because of the backlog in the system. I can tell you no one's more frustrated than Dr. Risby and his staff about the backlog in the system. So he's going to first talk to you a little bit about the current state of affairs. And then after that, Madam Chair, if you would call on Carol Cabello, and I'm just going to quickly tell you a little bit about these folks from my perspective. And then when they come up, you'll get to hear more from them. But Carol Cabello is our Director of Adult Mental Health at the department. Carol is a master level clinician. She worked for the Miami-Dade system for 10 years. Miami-Dade, as you know, is held up across the country. The court program they have there working with the mental health population as one of the best in the country. And she worked with the judge there that runs that program. She does a great job for us. She also is running our Jail Inreach pilot program that we have. She also is in charge of our forensic peer program, which hopefully she'll touch on a little bit. And that program's currently in the prison system. It's been having outstanding results, but that's going to be pushed into their jails with a pilot. And then again, Dr. Risby will talk a little bit about our jail-based restoration programs and our community-based restoration programs. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask and turn to Dr. Risby to come up, and I'll turn it over to him to cover current state of affairs. Dr. Risby.
That's great. We also have somebody who came in a little late. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Nakia Smith Sellers, and I am a prosecutor here in Fulton County. And I work with the competency docket that we are trying to create in Fulton County in the Superior Court. So for the district attorney's office, I handle all cases as it relates to the competency to stand trial, just that portion of the case.
Right.
So
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have some other folks online. I think Judge Brenda Weaver from the Appalachian Circuit let me know that she's online as well. Maybe in the part you can't see, whatever. So, all right. Dr. Risby.
And also, just want to say this is Dr. Deborah Pinels. I just joined as well.
Thank you. It's great to be with you this morning. A little sleep deprived. Sunday nights in particular is the hardest time to get physicians to cover the hospital. And so I agree to do one Sunday night a month. That's my token day. And yesterday was my Sunday night. And luck have it, it was one of the busiest Sunday nights in recent memory. So a little bit sleep deprived. But so that's my excuse if I blunder this presentation. Also, my son was visiting our house yesterday, and when I packed, I obviously grabbed one of his shirts and not one of mine. So when I got dressed, I realized this was too big to put a tie on. I looked like a turtle coming out. So that's my excuse for not having a tie this morning. So I'm just trying to get through the day. Thank you. Dr. Julie Oliver, our Assistant State Forensic Director, is joining us on the web, and Dr. Wright is present with us. Those are the two workhorses in the forensic division. I just happen to be the loudmouth for the division. And our forensic services are divided into community and forensic services. I just want to touch bases initially on the hospital services, and then I'll say a little bit more about forensic services in the community. So we have 641 beds in our state hospital system. So defendants that are adjudicated not guilty by reason of insanity or admitted to the state hospitals for treatment and evaluated for civil commitment. And we have to do a report to the courts in 30 days after that admission. For those defendants that are adjudicated incompetent to stand trial, they're usually admitted into the state hospital. We'll talk about some exceptions. In those admissions, we are required to do a report to the court in 90 days after that admission. So any defendant that's not going back to jail, unless their charges have been dismissed, their discharge to the community must be approved by the court. I'm gonna talk a lot, as the commissioner mentioned, workforce shortages. The combination of workforce shortages and the increased demand for forensic services has resulted in us having a wait list that we're trying our best to come up with solutions for. Now to pivot to community forensic services. So community forensic services is a big part of what we do. All the initial competency to stand trial and criminal responsibility evaluations are done by the community forensic services team. They also monitor individuals in the community that are NGRI and civilly committed by the court. They do the annual evaluations for individuals who are in the community that are civilly committed. And they monitor those individuals to make sure that they are staying clinically stable while they're in the community. What they also just recently started doing, I need to add to this slide, is when the court feels that competency restoration can be done as an outpatient, this team has been tasked with doing the outpatient community forensic competency. This community forensics also runs our community integration homes. We have 10 of them located across the state. These are residential homes for individuals who need the highest level of supervision, or the courts feel they need the highest level of supervision. It's staffed 24/7 with DBHED employees. They are actually in the home. And that does two things. Number one, we can tell very early if one of these clients are starting to decompensate, so we can do some intervention. We'll also know very quickly if someone is AWOL, because we keep a pretty good tab on where they're supposed to be all day. On the packet, this is page 20 or 39 on the packet, sorry. Let me find that for you. Page 22 in the packet, sorry. And lastly, we have residential forensic apartments. These apartments are run by 4 different community service boards, and it is the CSB staff that is on site at these apartments. They're not in the apartment like it is with the CIHs, but they're on site available 24/7 to assist the clients. The community forensic team is responsible for the forensic monitoring and supervision of those individuals. So we have 4 community service teams, uniquely named North, East, West, and South. Each one of those teams has a director. Each one of those teams have a platoon of psychologists that are responsible for the evaluations. And they have forensic community coordinators, FCCs, who do the majority of the monitoring of the individuals that are in the community. And just recently, and Dr. Oliver may say more about this when she speaks, we've been asking the FCCs to do some jail inreach as a way of keeping tabs on individuals who are on the wait list, and to sort of flag if someone on that wait list needs to be moved up on the wait list because of some clinical concerns. So let's talk about the pretrial evaluations. This is somewhat of a historical slide, and it shows the pretrial evaluations that were ordered and completed from 2006 to 2022. I guess the sum this up, we have had like a 35% increase in the number of pretrial evaluations since 2006. And this comes at a time when our vacancy rate for forensic psychologists is about 30%. So the demand has gone up, the workforce has not. In fact, it has gone down. If we just focus on the last few years of pretrial evaluations, these are the numbers that are pending at any one time. So in 2018, at any one time, we had about 600 adults waiting for the initial evaluation and about 300 or so juveniles. If we go all the way over to the right and look at July of 2022, that number for adults has increased to over 1,000 waiting for the initial evaluation. Only a slight increase in juveniles to roughly about 350. If we look at an even shorter time frame, from January 2021 to March of this year, you see the striking increase in the number of pretrial evaluations that we are getting from the courts. And now, if we extend this out a little bit, there are about 1,600 individuals waiting for the initial pretrial evaluation on January the 1st, 2023. It's not as bad for juveniles, but clearly that number has gone up. Why? For the most part, it's the combination of the increased number of orders and critical workforce shortage. Now, this is a slide not particularly proud of, but from the time the court writes the order to the time the court gets the report, how long does that take? And it oftentimes depends on geographically where the defendant is. And from this graph, you can see the blue line at the far right is the East Unit. The East Unit has a large geographic area, but have a significant vacancy rate. Dr. Wright is going to talk about some ways she is looking to sort of balance that out a little bit, but all of the teams have vacancy rates and all of the teams are showing some increased length of time between the date of the order and the date of the report. Now, I don't want you to think we're not trying to do a good job. So this data is an FY numbers, and this is an FY because this is how we have to report it to Office of Budget and Planning in FY years. In FY22, we did over 1,300 juvenile evaluations. Not quite what we were doing before COVID hit, but nonetheless, our teams are out there working. On the adult side, we did 2,700 evaluations. Again, not at the level pre-COVID, but we are churning out these evaluations. We just don't have enough people to churn them to keep up with the demand. The bottom of the slide, do I have a pointer? I don't worry. The bottom of the slide, just wanted to point out outpatient monitoring. And I mentioned that this is a responsibility of the community forensic team. And in FY22, there were 310 individuals who are NGRI or civilly committed non-restorables that they were monitoring in the community. Now, where there's a hospitals in the community meet, and this slide will move us in that direction. If we look at the number of individuals that were discharged from the hospital as outpatient civilly committed, in FY22, there were only 38, significantly fewer people than in previous years. If we look at the number of individuals civilly committed who have to return to the hospital after they were discharged, in FY22, we're at 16, significantly fewer. But look at the average time in the community before they have to return, years. The point I want to make is that the community forensic team does a very good job of keeping people out of the hospital once we get them out of the hospital. That's because of a very detailed discharge planning process and a very committed team of making sure they keep a pulse on everyone so that if someone is deteriorating, if someone has stopped taking their medicines, we have opportunities to intervene before it gets to a crisis. Now, shifting quickly to the hospitals, just to give you a very brief overview of our hospital system. We have a little over 1,000 beds in our state hospitals, between the 5 state hospitals. 298 of those beds are civil adult mental health beds. Those are your 1013s, your orders to apprehend. 641 of those beds are designated as forensic beds. And I want to just talk about those 641 beds for just a second. The orange side of this circle are those individuals that are admitted for competency restoration. Those are those initial admits where we have to give a report to the court at 90 days. The average length of stay for that group in that orange is about 3 to 4 months. Those beds will churn. We're not happy with that length of stay, and Dr. Oliver will talk to you about some initiatives that we are looking at to decrease the length of stay. That length of stay is for various reasons we could talk about during the question and answer session. But those are the beds that churn. In the gray area are the civilly committed forensic patients. So let me back up a little bit. For the patients that come into the hospital for their initial competency restoration, we restore 80 to 85% of them. They get better, they go back to jail, go to court, and proceed with their legal proceedings. It's that 15% or so that don't become competent. And those individuals get civilly committed. And those are the individuals that's represented in the gray. The length of stay for the individuals in the gray is between 2 and 20 years. So there's a big, probably about a little over half of them have a length of stay of about 2 to 5 years. But those who have a length of stay greater than 5 years, their average length of stay is about 10 to 12 years for various reasons. The point I want to make is that those beds in gray, they're not churning. Those patients are in there, and they're in there for years. And so at any one time, we really don't have 641 beds that we can churn. We only have about 300 and some beds for those people that are on the wait list. And so one of the things we're looking at is coming up with ways to increase the discharges in that 53%. Average wait time for someone who is waiting to get into the state hospital. The blue line is for females, and we do kind of okay with females. The average length of time they have to wait after we get the order is probably about 100 days, maybe 120 days, somewhere in there. That's not what we're proud of, but it's much better than what we have for the males. And that number is lower because there are fewer females, so we can manage that a little differently. For males, the length of time that an inmate may stay in jail, you can expect 10 months or longer at this point. And why is that? Oh, let me just say one more thing before I say why. Here's the numbers of people who are waiting to get into our state hospital. At the far right is April of 2023. If we extended that another month and we add the blue line and we add the bottom brown line, which are those people on bond, we are north of 450 individuals waiting for a bed in the state hospital right now. And there are a number of reasons why. And here's one of them. The blue line is the number of orders we receive each month. And this is just from January 2022 to March of 2023. The blue line is the number of orders we receive every month. The orange line is the total discharges every month. So we're getting more orders than we're getting people discharged. And if you may remember, a few slides earlier talked about the number of civilly committed people who are discharged to the community. There were only 38 of those. last fiscal year. So that gray area of that circle I was telling you, those beds are really not churning. And so most of the churn is in those some 320 some odd beds that we have for acute admissions. Here's some of the reasons for the barriers for discharge. Won't go into all of them here. I'll just point out that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are very challenging to place in the community. Anybody who has a sex offender history is a challenge. Individuals who need nursing homes without any resources, and nursing homes have not been very welcoming of some of our patients because they have a criminal history. Patients with immigration status concerns are just sort of stuck in our hospitals. And persons who need a personal care home, we think they could do well in a personal care home. They just can't afford it. Even if they have SSI, it's not enough to get them in a personal care home that we feel comfortable putting them in. Okay? And so we identified our challenges in the pretrial stage. It's mostly a workforce challenge plus the increased number of orders. On the admission side, we have some beds that are offline. We have increased number of orders, more orders than we could discharge people for. And we have a significant vacancy rate of psychologists in the hospital as well as in the community. In the discharge barriers, so security delays, housing resources, keeps patients in the hospital, jail transport. Sometimes the jail says, we're not coming to get them. They're ready to go. They're competent to stand trial. The sheriff says, we can't manage these kind of people. You just keep them to the court date. So, you know, and I was told real early, don't irritate a public official, an elected public official like that. So the sheriff says you can't manage them. We don't like it. We keep them. And at some point, someone remembers that they're there and they get on the docket.
You okay with us interrupting? There's some questions, chat.
Sure,
okay.
please.
Mr. Bullard?
Just so I'm
You have a
clear,
question? Easier to you to say it than me to try to read it.
of course, thank you for taking it. Just as a point of clarification, maybe just for me, the 53% of beds that are for those defendants who are civilly committed, do those numbers include those defendants whom have been found insane and then civilly committed, or are those just the pretrial incompetency civil commitments?
Both. Any
Okay.
NGRI that's found civil, non-restorable or committable, I should say, gets civilly committed into the hospital, and any non-restorable will get committed to the hospital.
All right. And just for number's sake, do we know what the split is between those? I'm sure those committed after finding some insanity are a far lesser number.
So most of them are ISTs. The number of NGRIs are relatively small.
Right. Okay. For number's sake, I just wanted to ask. Thank you.
Sure. Oops, sorry. The one thing that we're trying to balance is when a defendant becomes competent to stand trial. Per the code, we're supposed to send them back to the jail. We have an option to keep them if we think it's clinically important or clinically necessary. We all know that a lot of these defendants, when they go back to the jail, we're rolling the dice as whether or not they're going to be compliant, if they're going to decompensate. And we've had a roller coaster with several people before we get them competent, send them to jail. 8 months later, we're getting a call, you need to take them back. We end up taking them back, bumping somebody on the wait list to get them back in. So even though we want to start getting people off the wait list, we're having more and more discussions about holding people until the hearing. And that is also a problem. So we do it on a case-by-case basis. We haven't come up with a policy for the hospitals yet on how to do this. We're saying use your clinical judgment. And when we said that, the clinical judgment has been to keep them. So we're having more, so our length of stay is being affected by that. And Dr. Oliver is going to talk about some things that she is implementing, and she and Dr. Wright, on how to address some of these challenges. And so these are the initiatives. I'm going to pause and let Dr. Oliver talk about these initiatives. Dr. Wright will chime in, and I'll chime in as needed. Dr. Oliver?
Okay, can you hear me with the presentation?
Gotta wait a second for technology to catch up here.
Okay, is that good?
We're good. We can hear you.
All right, so Dr. Risby talked about the forensic community coordinators checking in with people who are pending admission to the hospitals. That is something that we started realizing that we had a lot of people waiting, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't having anyone sit in jail who was very ill and needed to be prioritized. So our FCCs are going into the jails and checking on people pending admission. If possible, they'll do restoration sessions. If they think the person may be competent, then it goes back to our evaluators to do a reevaluation. So we started doing reevaluations of people in the jail over a year ago, but we didn't start tracking the number of people that we were finding competent through that process until July 1st of 2022. Since that time, we found 67 people competent while they were waiting for a hospital bed. So that may sound like a small number, but you think about that 67 people who didn't need to come into the hospital and were able to move on with their case. So we think that that is a good initiative that's reaping some benefits for us. Another thing that might sound kind of minor, but it was important, people were getting admitted to the adult mental health side of our hospitals, and we didn't know that they were on our waiting list for pretrial evaluation, or if they may have been on our waiting list for admission for forensics. So they were coming to the hospital and being discharged back to the jail, and we were not capturing them. We now have a system in place where they are identified and they are flagged, so we can do their evaluation when they are stabilized before they return back to jail. So in some ways, we're finding people competent before they have the opportunity to be IST in the jail. So we think that is very helpful to the process. The reduction of length of stay initiative, that is kind of hospital specific. I met with the forensic directors at the hospitals, and they realized, of course, we don't have the resources that we need. We want more resources, but are we effectively using the resources that we have? Are we doing the evaluations as soon as we think the person is competent? Are we getting those reports to the court? Are we having the conversations in treatment team that's very competency focused? So it's just a process to get us really focused on churning those beds that we have for restoration over as quickly as is feasible to move people through. And the goal was for the hospitals to reduce the length of stay by 20% over the course of the year. And 2 of our hospitals have met that goal. So we are moving people through more quickly. The waiting list management piece of our initiatives is just something that we had to do because it used to be that the state office would assign cases for admission, but then we had to look and consulting with other states on the process of how they're handling their wait list. We're pretty consistent, but we're admitting by the date we receive the court order, and then we're prioritizing those who are in clinical need. Again, we're getting that clinical information from our forensic community coordinators, also getting it from the jails and attorneys. So we will prioritize if we think someone is very ill, but it's the fairest way we can manage the waiting list. The contract evaluator piece, we've hired contract evaluators and hourly psychologists who are former DBHDD employees to help do those pretrial evaluations to reduce that backlog. The RISE program, I don't know if it's going to be talked about more later on, but I'll just say that this is a pilot project in the Cobb County Jail where DBHDD contracted with WellPath for a 20-bed unit for jail restoration, all males. It opened on January 31st of this year, currently has 18 people enrolled. As of this morning, I just got a number. We have the 5th person who was found competent in that program. 1 was evaluated. I'm waiting to see what that the opinion is for that one. So we're moving people through who don't need hospital level of care through this program. So that's an option that we're looking at to see if that can help decrease the waiting time for people who really need a hospital bed. We're trying different things with diversion. We hired a forensic transition specialist to help us look at the people on the waiting list, try to identify those who might need nursing homes so we can start working on those things instead of admitting the person to the hospital and then starting the process. Same thing with our referrals for the DD process, trying to get those, that's kind of a lengthy process. So starting it as early as we can to reduce the length of stay if someone does have to come to the hospital. We also have a state court pilot project that started years ago, and it kind of fizzled out because we went into emergency management mode and trying to figure out what to do with the wait list. So we're trying to reinvigorate this state court pilot where we look at diverting people to treatment when the goal is not really prosecution. It's just the courts don't know how to get this person access to treatment. So we're starting to have those conversations again of how we can implement that to prevent hospitalization altogether and get people into long-term treatment when that's the goal. So that's a summary of our initiatives that we've done. I don't know if there are any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Oliver? Anyone? No. Okay.
Oh, is Dr. Paddles on?
Yes, she is.
Oh, okay.
She came on earlier and somebody was talking, so I didn't introduce her.
I have a question about the RISE program, just
Okay.
because we have a couple of clients that are currently. I guess the restoration services or programs that are taking place at the Cobb County Jail, do they differ at all from, I guess, what would happen in a DBHDD facility?
Yes and no. It's not a hospital level care, and we're real intentional about that. So we provided the RISE team with educational brochure of what we expected them to cover, Georgia-based competency stuff for the clients. And so they're following that booklet. They are doing some of the typical groups that we would do in the hospital, anger management, understanding your symptoms, some of those basic groups. So they are doing those. It's just at a, it's just not hospital level care. So we just wanted to be real careful with that. Also, we didn't want it to equate to a hospital admission if they went to the RISE. So those who go in the RISE program, they stay on the wait list just in case things don't work out. The defendant and their attorney has sort of volunteered or agreed to come to the program. If the defendant gets there and says, I don't like this, send me back wherever I came from, we'll send them back. So there's no time for, we're not going to like a 90-day eval after you've been at the RISE program. We're going to have you at the RISE program to work with you while you're on the wait list. Hopefully you won't have to get admitted. You can get competent at the RISE if it takes 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whatever it takes. We're working with you. And if you're still not competent by the time you're ready to come into the hospital, hopefully the time you spend at RISE will make it easier for you once you get into the hospital. So the intensity of the groups are a little bit different. I think the style of our people in the hospital is a little bit different. But so there's a template that looks similar, but the intensity is different.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Oliver, will you agree with that?
I do. They have the same kind of clinicians that the hospital do. So it's not like they're missing out on some form of treatment. They have access to medication, but it's different in the ways that Dr. Risby described.
And that's the biggest challenge with the jail-based program right now is medication compliance. If the patient decides they don't want to take it after they get there, there's not a good process to manage that. We're talking to them about some ideas. In the hospital, we have a process to manage that. But there, if they change their mind, then they start deteriorating. Well, what do? And so either they go back to general population and be sick, or we come up with some sort of mechanism. We don't want to bring them into the hospital because they've jumped the line, so to speak, of other people who've been on the wait list. But that's one of the challenges with the jail-based program, what to do with medication non-compliance. And we're looking at some strategies.
I have a question. Where is the jail-based program located?
So we actually have two. There's one in Cobb County. The one in Cobb County is state funded for everybody in the, it's not just for Cobb County.
Okay.
So other jurisdictions, we look at people on the wait list in other jurisdictions who may be appropriate, then we're referring them to the Cobb County program. There's one in Fulton County, as you may be familiar with, and that we've been having that 10 years. It's just for Fulton County, which that's the big difference with it. It's with it's a contract with Emory, and it has a similar Grady Emory contract to do the evaluations, and then there's a separate Emory contract to run that program, the jail-based Fulton County program. It's 16 beds. It's a little bit smaller.
Okay, so I think that now we are supposed to be getting Carol Caraballo to come up and talk to us, and then Dr. Pinellas will speak. I think that means that you're going to have to tell us where you are in the slide presentation because it's not in order.
Page 1.
Page 1. All right, we can handle that, I think.
Okay. So again, good morning, everybody. I'm Carol Caraballo. I'm the Director for the Office of Adult Mental Health at DBHCD. I'm not going to take a lot of your time, but I really wanted to cover some of the diversion programs that we have in the Office of Adult Mental Health to hopefully stop individuals from going into the forensic system. So with that, I wanted to just kind of start with a quick definition of diversion, but I also wanted to point out this handout that was provided to you, which provides some of those definitions, and it also gives more of a comprehensive look on all of the different diversion strategies that we have in the behavioral health division, not just the couple that I'm going to focus on today.
Chelsea, do we have, or Chelsea's gone, right? Do we have this for the folks that are online? Do we know? Ashley, do you know?
I don't think so, but we can make it available because I just brought this in
Today. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Today.
So
But
the
I want-
slides are sent to the folks, but then we can add this to it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So just a quick working definition of diversion, which is an intervention approach that redirects individuals from the criminal justice system and into community support and treatment. So I'm just going to focus on, like the commissioner said, some of our forensic peer mentor work and some of our jail in-reach work as well. So some of the goals of behavioral health diversion is to, remove or prevent individuals from entering the criminal justice system and to provide the supports needed to assist individuals that have behavioral health challenges that are in the criminal justice system and, after incarceration. So we're going to talk first about forensic peer mentors. So forensic peer mentors are individuals that have lived experience with both behavioral health challenges, so mental health or substance use, and also lived experience within the criminal justice system. They're really key in some of these projects that I'm going to talk about to help divert individuals and link them back to the community for treatment and resources. So in order to start, our forensic peer mentors go through quite a bit of training. Prior to becoming a forensic peer mentor, they go through 40 hours to become a certified peer specialist. And we have certified peer specialists in both mental health, addictive disease. We also have youth and parent, a certified peer specialist. After they've completed that training, they then undergo an additional 40 hours to become a forensic peer mentor. Once that's done, they require 12 continuing education hours each year. And then depending on the position that they have with either the prisons or CSBs, then they receive additional training for those positions as well. So the goal of the forensic peer mentors is to support returning citizens, to reduce criminal recidivism. I'm also going to say hospital recidivism, change behaviors, establish safety, develop supportive and healthy supportive networks, and access community resources. This is just a quick slide as to where some of our forensic peer mentors are currently working. We have them in prisons, daily reporting centers and transition centers, mental health courts. We have them in our AOT programs and in our jails. There's also our certified peer specialists or forensic peer mentors can be found in our crisis continuum, including our CSU and some of our most intensive community work like our ACT teams. So we're going to start with the forensic peer mentors role in our prisons. So they usually carry a caseload of about 20 individuals. They start working with these returning citizens about 18 months prior to their release. They collaborate with the prison staff in order to be able to help with transition planning and linking that individual, to the community. And they work with these individuals for about a year after their release. So they literally walk out with this individual hand in hand and link them to those community-based services, because we know that sometimes from the moment that they're released from prison and they go into care, that's a good time that we lose them, right? So we want to make sure that they're, literally walking hand in hand with them to their appointments. And just one historical fact that the first forensic peer mentor was placed in the state prison in Phillips State Prison in Beaufort, Georgia in 2015. These are just some of the goals of the forensic peer mentors. So they want to focus on the needs of returning citizens that have a significant psychiatric disorder and or co-occurring challenges. They want to, again, provide those linkage to community resources, model and educate returning citizens about recovery, and role model public problem-solving techniques, self-advocacy, and appropriate coping skills. These are just some of the activities that the forensic peer mentors do when they're working with the returning citizens. So providing mentoring, peer support, and linkage, assessing their needs to develop service plans and how to address those. They act as advocates. They complete required documentation, including progress notes, maintain a working knowledge of the community resources, and aid individuals in understanding and complying with probation and parole requirements. So this is a list of where our forensic peer mentors are currently at within the prison. So we're in 23 prisons in the state of Georgia. There's a couple of positions that are vacant. We've actually, as you've heard, we've talked about the workforce challenges, and that's still the case for forensic peer mentors as well. So there's a couple of empty positions. But a couple of months ago, there was a more vacant positions. In the last couple of months, we've probably filled 4 or 5 of these positions. So there's been a forward move, progression that's being made for this. So there are, I believe, 34 state prisons in the state of Georgia. So we're in about 67% of those at this time. This is the 7-day reporting centers that you can find forensic peer mentors, the transition centers, and also the integrated treatment facilities where they also provide services. Forensic peer mentors work one-on-one with the individuals. They can provide some individual sessions. They also can facilitate some treatment groups. This is the referral criteria for the prisons to refer somebody to a forensic peer mentor. So it's an individual who is enrolled in mental health services with or without a co-occurring diagnosis, an individual who wants to receive those services by a forensic peer mentor, and a person who is actively engaged in their wellness and empowerment and self-advocacy. And again, it's they start working with the individual 18 months prior to their release. I'm not going to get into the mental health courts, but I also wanted to point out that we do have forensic peer mentors that are working within some of our forensic peer mentors and act as part of a team to assist the clinician and really help in engaging that individual into their treatment services. These is a list of the current mental health courts that are supported by DBHDD that provide that treatment team and that forensic peer mentor. So you have the counties that are located and the CSBs that are working with those courts. This is a bit of a historical slide. So forensic peer mentors began working in 2015. So you'll see the number of individuals that were served in the prisons, in the daily reporting centers, and the mental health courts. Mental health courts started in fiscal year 2020. So there's been almost 5,000, individuals, returning citizens that have been served by forensic peer mentors since the inception in 2015. I did a quick comparison of last fiscal year and where we are at this current fiscal year of how many individuals have been served. And if you see, we are already surpassing the total fiscal year numbers from last year. We're a little bit falling short in the mental health courts. We do have some vacancies there, but I believe that we're on target to still meet the same number at least of last year. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where we're going with some of our diversion programs. So one of the things that we just did in February of this year is that DBHDD hired their first forensic peer mentor training liaison. This took quite a bit. Ms. Salaji Ruffin, who now fills that position, spent 23 years in state prison. So hiring somebody with such a record with DBHDD posed couple of challenges, and I wish the commissioner was here to tell his story, but he actually received a phone call from Governor Deal saying you have to hire Laji, because Laji actually was part of the governor's mansion program when he was incarcerated and prior to his release. Laji is now working directly with the forensic peer mentors. He is visiting them in the jails, helping them to onboard, and really providing just some additional training and additional support to be able to do this work. And Judge Gosselin, this is who I mentioned that would be working with your peer over at your jail in-reach program. So we're really excited to have him and have him support this work. And again, having that lived experience, it's something that I can't provide as a clinician in doing this work. So we're very excited to be able to have done that. Some of our jail in-reach pilots. So we started working with jail in-reach in 2021. We received some federal funds to have some of the CSBs hire case managers and place those case managers within the jails to work with individuals that have behavioral health needs, to then start linking them to treatment while they were in the prisons, the jails, and then, upon release, having them already linked and then, walk out with them, also and provide that treatment and care that they needed, with the goals of reducing hospitalizations, incarceration, and homelessness. There was 12 CSBs that were selected to do some of this work. Unfortunately, the funding for this was limited to only about $23,000 for a clinician, which is barely a part-time individual. So a lot of that work, it was not where we wanted it to be. I will say that. This really required more of I believe, a team approach to be able to be more successful and see the numbers that we really wanted to see. These are the CSBs that were selected for that pilot. The ones that have an asterisk next to them were actually able to be operational. The other ones, unfortunately, due to the workforce shortage, have yet to have a staff person working within those jails. Here is some of the data for those initial pilots. Despite there being some workforce challenges, they still had contact with over 1,300 individuals, and about 69% of them successfully entered behavioral health care upon their release from the jails. So this year in April in 2023, with the support of the commissioner, we decided to expand some of our jail in-reach work. And our first meeting with Judge Goslin and her team, we actually went out and we proposed adding a forensic peer mentor to this work. So we would be having a case manager, a clinician that would be embedded within the jail, and working with a forensic peer mentor to identify individuals that need treatment and support, that have behavioral health conditions, and then link them to the services and have the forensic peer mentor, again, like the prisons, walk out with them hand in hand and link them to those services. So how is this different from our previous pilots? It really is just the addition of that forensic peer mentor into that treatment setting and having those individuals within the jails working collaboratively. We also decided to use a unified screening tool so that all of the individuals would be using the brief jail mental health in-reach form. Those individuals will be using that screening form. That will be done by the correction officers. The correction officers will provide that information to the case managers and to the forensic peer mentors. The funding for this program is now, since it's a team approach, we're also funding some training and some additional resources. It's now at $165,000. So it's quite a difference from the initial funding of only the clinician at $23,000. These are the 4 pilot sites that we have for the jail in-reach program. So the first one being in Hall County. And I believe as of 2 weeks ago, the forensic peer mentor was hired within that jail. We are onboarding the clinician, hopefully soon. We next met with Gwinnett County and Viewpoint Health. And they also had some forensic peer mentors that have already gone through the hiring process, and they've also identified their first clinician. We have a meeting at the end of this month with Walton County and Advantage to also bring them on board to do this work. And then the next pilot is still to be determined. The commissioner has 2 counties that have expressed some interest that we'll be reaching out, and hopefully in the next month or so, we'll be able to identify who the next pilot site would be. I wanted to briefly touch on assisted outpatient treatment. I'm not going to get into it in too much detail, but we also have peers that are working with the individuals in assisted outpatient treatment. So this is also a team approach that provides a clinician, a case manager, and that forensic peer mentor to really walk hand in hand with those individuals and help them go through the court process, understand what that is like, and keep them in compliance with the judge, and also with making sure that they're following through with their treatment and their appointments. This is the target population for assisted outpatient treatment. So adults with a severe and persistent mental illness, and those that have frequent hospitalizations, incarcerations, and that are really unable to engage in treatment independently without this type of assistance. We have several corresponder programs as well that we are working with at DBHDD. One of the ways that we want to expand some of this work, so corresponder pairs a clinician with law enforcement officer, and they go out in the community and they respond to emergency crisis calls. We have recently applied for a grant where we are hoping to add a forensic peer mentor to the corresponder programs to provide a secondary response. So not necessarily answering what I'm going to call a hot call, the 911 calls and going out, but providing some of that follow-up and the outreach after the crisis is resolved. So that once, let's say if the crisis is resolved on scene, if the person is taken to a crisis unit, that forensic peer mentor can go out and engage the individual and again, hope to link them into treatment, because after crisis is really the crucial and vital time to get those individuals fully engaged. So we're hoping with the addition of a forensic peer mentor that we would be able to have a higher success in that sense. We hopefully will hear back in September and be able to receive that grant funding. And that is what I have for you. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, are there any questions? Anybody online?
Yeah, with the, I guess, people that were in prisons and get connected with the forensic peer mentor, have y'all tracked it all, just their recidivism rates, or are you able to track how long they stay engaged with their CSB once they, stay engaged with services once they get released from custody?
So the forensic peer mentor will follow them for up to a year. And for the ones that the forensic peer mentor has maintained that contact for that year, there has been 0 individuals that have returned to prison.
What's the percentage of folks that maintain the contact?
I would have to get back to you on that one, Judge Costa. I'm happy to find that out.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Anybody else? This is very exciting work. We're very excited in Hall County, by the way. I feel very lucky that we got one of these pilot projects. So, okay. I think that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Ms. Carval. All right. Next would be Dr. Pinels. Is that how you say your name, Doctor?
Finals, like
Pinels. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I just want to be clear. You end at noon, right? I want to be clear on my timing.
Are we there, or Dr. Wright? Joe, okay. Oh, yes, I've been getting the thumbs up from everybody. So yes, we're ready.
Great. And so I am not able to see my slides in this view. And I assume somebody else is driving the slides, or do you need me to share my screen?
Somebody else is driving them. If you know what page they start on, that would be helpful for us.
She should actually share her screen.
She should. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The tech person is saying you should share your screen.
Okay,
that's in charge, really, not me.
Perfect. That'll make it much easier. Thank you. Then, great. Can you see that?
Yes, you might need to make it a little bigger if you can.
Working on it. There you go.
Okay, that's
all
good.
right. Well, hi, I am actually in Boston right now, zooming into Georgia. Just wanted to give a little bit of my background. I am an adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry and the director of the program in psychiatry, law, and ethics at the University of Michigan Medical School, and an adjunct clinical professor at University of Michigan Law School. I actually wear several other hats, but in this role, I'm a consulting psychiatrist for Georgia's DBHDD. I work nationally, consulting to many jurisdictions, and serve through my University of Michigan role as the medical director for behavioral health and forensic programs for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And I've been working in forensic services and state government for the last probably 20 years. along a lot of different roles, both providing evaluations and testimony, and now also as a systems consultant to many different states that are dealing with some of the issues that Dr. Risby and Dr. Oliver spoke about. I have no conflicts related to this presentation, and just want to share my thoughts and opinions per the request of Commissioner Tanner. So a couple of things.
Dr. Piles, I just want to let everybody know it's your slides start on the bottom of page 30, moving on to page 31, so they know where to look. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm just going to try and go through the beginning fairly quickly because I think you all are familiar with it, but I think it sets the stage, and then talk about some national trends to help Georgians know that some of the things you're struggling with, you're not alone with. And I think you have some tremendous opportunities to think about how your services can move forward in a positive way, so that people who need services can access them when they need them. And so I'm focusing primarily on competence to stand trial because we are in a national crisis related to these systems, where wait lists for evaluations and restoration services are long. And it really interplays with all the other systems that you heard mentioned about in terms of the people that are civilly committed. One of the people on the panel asked that wonderful question about who's in that 53% of the other people committed to the state hospital. Every part of the system impacts the other part of the system. And so taking a comprehensive look at a system as a whole is really an important thing. Focusing on the competence to stand trial population, I think, is also important because this is partly what's driving some of these system challenges. It's hard to know actually where to begin the conversation, but you all know that competence to stand trial is an incredibly important constitutional right for defendants who are facing criminal charges or delinquency charges to make sure that they have their Sixth Amendment and 14th Amendment rights upheld and have a fair and dignified court process. There are certain legal standards that clinicians use to look at what symptom presentation an individual may have that may or may not impede their ability to serve as a pretrial defendant in accordance with the legal standards. And generally, these boil down to whether a defendant is able to understand their charges, the verdicts, the potential consequences of those verdicts in a trial, understand the trial participants and process, ability to assist counsel, and decision-making ability. As we think about that, that's a really important aspect because what has happened in the United States is as those constitutional rights have been upheld, and importantly so, we've run into systems issues that make it very difficult to move forward with those cases. For example, we have systems issues where we know that people with mental health and substance use conditions are arrested more frequently than people without. We know that when people come to court, a competency issue may be raised. There's evaluations that need to take place, and then findings that can take place, opinions by the evaluators, and then adjudications by the court that then lead to particular dispositions. And over the course of time, there have been trends that are now being shifted. For example, you heard Carol talk about the diversion strategies. We are trying to move more and more to community-based alternatives and not relying on institutional care, whether that institution is a jail, a prison, or even a state hospital, if those are not the facilities that are necessary to keep society safe and to help that person access care. And so when we look at the population of the criminal involved mental health person sent for evaluation and restoration, you really have to look at them from two different lenses. One is the criminal lens, what are the charges they're facing? But the other is, what are the medical conditions that they have that are potentially impeding their abilities to serve as a pretrial defendant? Those can be any number of mental illnesses. By far, the majority of people have psychotic disorders or mood disorders like bipolar disorder. They may have co-occurring substance use disorders, and with the substance use problems that we have today, that's a very common scenario. You heard Dr. Risby talk about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, another important group of people found in the competency system. And then many of them have co-occurring medical conditions as well, because of the challenges they have in achieving medical stability as they move in and out of systems. They also mostly have trauma histories, and those can be early trauma and we have study after study that shows high ACE factors, adverse childhood experiences of people in criminal justice and behavioral health settings. And then many have complex personality issues. Not all do, but many do. They may also have traumatic brain injuries that make them somewhat more challenging to work with and to have remain engaged in treatment. And these individuals, importantly, are served across multiple settings. They're served in the community, they're served in forensic hospitals, and then they're served in correctional settings, not to mention emergency departments and outpatient clinics. And all too often, they may look different depending on the setting they're in. I'm frequently consulted on cases of people in jail who may be having a difficult adjustment, engaging in some sort of what seems like aggressive behavior, and people see them as antisocial when really they may be somebody with an intellectual disability who's having a communication challenge. And so how people present in different settings can really make a difference for how decisions are made around them. The competence to stand trial evaluations that Dr. Oliver spoke about really look at what is the nexus between this person's mental health issues and their ability to serve as a pretrial defendant and a recommended disposition. We have historically looked at evaluators through different ways nationally. If you look at one state, you're really only understanding that one state. Evaluation mechanics operate very differently. The core of the evaluation may be the same, but we have state-operated evaluators, private evaluators. Some states require single evaluation. Some states require multiple evaluators opining on a particular issue. Different disciplines are qualified as examiners for competence to stand trial or even sanity evaluations. There are different time standards. For example, when I was running forensic services in the state of Massachusetts, we had immediate same-day access to evaluators in every court. Where I work now in Michigan, people are assigned to come to a centralized evaluation facility, which can take up to 60 days to get that evaluation. And the statutes around that vary. And so when we look at remedies that have been attempted in different states, it's not always applicable to one particular jurisdiction. The locations where evaluations take place can also vary. In terms of restoration, which, by the way, that term is used globally, but sometimes we think about other terminology, for example, for people with intellectual disabilities who aren't being restored to a period of symptom resolution, but they're learning new skills that may be sometimes called attainment. In juveniles, they often use the word remediation. There's two major components that we think about. One is medication. For example, if the defendant has a delusion or a psychotic process or a mood disorder, medications are going to be the main way of having that person return to the ability to serve as a pretrial defendant. You heard Dr. Oliver talk about people in jail who are restored through the normal course of taking medications while they're in jail. That medications are going to be the main, since most people are incompetent because of psychotic illnesses or mood disorders, medications are going to be the main way people are restored. There are also classes that are offered. These are what we call non-pharmacological approaches to competence restoration that you heard Dr. Risby speak about. Programs that maybe give people legal education, some anger management skills and the like. There is really no evidence whatsoever that any particular competence restoration class or grouping of classes gets you to restoration faster. There are so many systems issues that are involved in this that it's really complicated to know what is actually sort of how these are actually augmenting what would be considered treatment approaches for people with serious mental illness. Nonetheless, these are good practices. Legal education is an important driver of restoration services and is a very much a key component of what is offered across the United States. There's a legal case that's important to think about as you look at lengths of stay and thinking about the use of your state hospital beds, which, as you heard, you have about 300 beds that are churning on a regular basis and about 300 beds that are pretty consistently locked because of or blocked because of the length of stay of some people. And the Supreme Court already ruled on this issue that says the due process requires that the nature and duration of confinement should bear some reasonable relation to the purpose for which the individual is confined. And I bring that up because it's an important construct in the competence to stand trial arena, where you have individuals who may be utilizing a hospital bed and confined to an institutional setting went beyond the point that where restoration is no longer going to be useful, and beyond the point where they need to be confined as such. And so that's why Dr. Oliver's strategy is looking at what are the discharge barriers is so important to think about. I haven't done the math for Georgia in my consultative work, but in general, a state hospital bed costs about somewhere between $350,000 to $500,000 a year per person that sits in that bed. And so when you look at taxpayer dollars and the point of a state hospital, any state should be looking at their state hospital and saying, we want to get the right people in that resource at the right time for the right need, regardless of their legal status. If somebody needs a state hospital bed, they should be able to access it. And people who don't need those beds should be able to leave those beds so that we can free the space up for other people who may need those beds. Yet restoration has really depended on state hospitals for the most part across the United States. And so we're in a sea change trying to turn that around, trying to build out alternative models so that we can really use those state hospital beds really for the reason that they are intended. So let me just jump to some national trends. There are growing wait lists around the country. I would say that these trends really started around 2014. Not exactly sure why. There's lots of theories as to why that might have happened. There was some relief that states saw some during COVID that may have been because of court slowing down, that may have been because arrests were slowing down. I don't know fully all the reasons, but we've certainly seen a major surge since COVID-19 in the number of orders. And you saw that data from Dr. Risby that was put together, the major surge in the number of orders that are coming in. That may have to do with staff fraying in communities, a variety of issues that may be going on. But now we have wait lists for restorations and wait lists for evaluations that are really, and vacancies of staff to be able to provide these services that are really creating a current crisis, making it all the more important for bodies like this one to really consider what are the strategic areas that Georgia wants to take to help build attention to that issue. If you look at hospital bed utilization across states, if you look at Georgia, you're based on a per population ratio. Some people say, well, there should be a certain number of state hospital beds per population. What we're seeing more and more is that we have to look beyond just beds per population because that doesn't tell the full story. We do see that more and more state hospital beds are being utilized by forensically committed populations. And certainly that's true in Georgia. Even if they're civilly committed, many of them are civilly committed under a forensic, what was a forensic lens to begin with. And across the country, about 50% of state hospital beds are occupied by forensic populations. Some states, it's almost 100% of the beds that are occupied by forensic patients. In some ways, this is almost backwards because what we want is to be able to use state hospitals to treat people before they get arrested and to keep and to use the hospital system to prevent arrest. So again, these diversion strategies are really important to think about. But for now, we're in a position where we haven't turned that ship yet, and the state hospital has become de facto these forensic settings. This is a slide from a report of the American Psychiatric Association that I would not expect you to read or understand. I gave you the resource in your materials to show you some of the national trends. although there are some people that and some bodies that say, well, every state needs X number of beds per X number of population. What we're really seeing more and more in this beyond beds conversation is that there are system dynamics at play. The more outpatient services you have, for example, the more access you have to services, the more you may prevent the need for inpatient care. We see this in diabetes management. We see this in asthma management, orthopedic management. It's no different in psychiatric and substance use management. The more we build a community service system that can address the needs of people in crisis and prevent crises from happening, the less reliance we would have on inpatient level of care, which is fundamentally going to always be necessary, but is the most expensive resource. The competency system and the not guilty by reason of insanity system are just as complicated as those other systems that we see in looking at what we need. And so what we need is to build this continuum of care, and we're seeing that built across the country. When we look at the competency issue, the issue of competency is raised. Ironically, the sicker somebody is who shows up in court, oftentimes the less available diversion strategies are for them, because the competency issue is raised, and then that ball is technically in play for the court because of the constitutional issues at stake. And so those strategies that might be available to other defendants who have lower level mental health impairment become less available because the competency system has relied historically on the state hospitals. There's many factors that play into that. I don't want to spend a lot of time. You'll have these materials available to you. But certainly for people with different conditions, and you hear that there's a build out with the forensic inreach coordinators looking at how do we build strategies for somebody, for example, with dementia. They don't need to come to a state hospital for restoration. That would be an incredible, those are not good uses of that precious resource. But how do we build alternative roadways? Many states have faced incredible pressure and litigation around this. One of my roles has been to be the psychiatric expert in Washington for the court monitor in the True Blood case, which was a case that has cost the state millions and 80, 100 millions of dollars worth of fines that have gone into jail diversion services. Now there's a settlement and the state is paying for some of those diversion services. And still the problems remain. And so for Georgia to take this on through this body is really an important step to try and get ahead of some of that. The litigation impacts around the country have led to federal court orders that have required admission within certain periods of time, that have limited certain admissions into hospitals, that have shortened restoration timeframes, that have shortened waiting periods based on a court order, and that have led to fees and fines for alternative uses. It is certainly a good idea to get ahead of these issues rather than have them solved through a federal court. Being involved in some of those federal court processes, they do certainly bring attention to some of these issues in different ways. Across the national landscape, the American Bar Association actually revised some of their standards to say that it was okay for defendants charged with minor crimes to be released or civilly committed rather than have a competence to stand trial evaluation. So the concern about ineffective assistance of counsel for not raising it on minor crimes has some protection from these ABA standards, not fully, but some. There are many states that are looking at community-based restoration services. This data is as recent as I have it from 2018, obviously pre-pandemic, but many more states are trying to build out community-based competency restoration with the idea that not everybody who might have a delusion or might have intellectual disability needs to be in a hospital to treat that. That's not how we treat mental illness generally. And so why would that be any different for people who are facing challenges as a pretrial defendant if they can be safely released? And that's obviously going to rely upon a court decision. There's also states that are, and again, because we see more states growing these jail-based restoration competency programs. These are these are complicated, as Dr. Risby pointed out, in terms of who goes into them and how they operate and whether they actually serve to expedite restoration in a way that's different than what Dr. Oliver was pointing out, in terms of people who are going to be restored within jail processes by taking medications generally. I think there's much more research that is needed to understand how these work. And then, of course, these diversion strategies, states are looking at revising policies on individuals with misdemeanor charges and removing them. There's several states that, for example, Florida and New York, that have alternatives to restoration for people with misdemeanor charges altogether, because oftentimes what we see is people go through these restoration processes and charges are dismissed anyway, having spent a lot of taxpayer dollars and effort going to restoration, when that's really the prosecutorial interest on low-level misdemeanors are often not as strong. Potentials for community release provisions for restoration, and then diversion strategies. There have been many states that have come together to do learning collaboratives. The SAMHSA Gain Center has promoted many of these learning collaboratives going back to 2018. Georgia has participated in that learning collaborative. States have looked across the sequential intercept model for strategies of diversion, developing this kind of graphic to sort of think about these. You have CSG sitting in this discussion, which is great, looking at the familiar faces programs to try and understand how best to serve people who are cycling in and out of these systems and to find a better pathway for them. There are many strategies that states have taken on. Again, I leave this for you for references that really look beyond just relying upon institutional level of care, whether it's a bed in a state hospital or in a jail, but really looking at what is the mental health conditions need, what is the public safety need, and how do we think about getting solutions to people without inadvertently running into violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, protecting a constitutional right, but then over relying on institutions for people who don't need institutional based care. States have also looked at civil commitment strategies, a non-criminal legal mechanism for court-ordered care to prevent harm and mandate treatment. This has been done, this traditional civil commitment is utilized for mental illness primarily. Some states have civil commitment for people with IDD, substance use, and sex offending. For this, we're talking about people primarily with mental illness. And although civil commitment can be a strategy in some cases, it is not an exact fit for competency restoration because you have different courts of jurisdiction, different purposes, different durations, different criteria. And so not everyone, for example, that is incompetent to stand trial is going to meet criteria for civil commitment. Think of the person who might have a traumatic brain injury, for example, or who might have dementia. And so states really need to think about who are the populations that they're serving in these forensic settings clinically, and what are the laws that can both prevent harm and protect the public simultaneously. And so although competence to stand trial is grounded in these fundamental constitutional rights, we have to look at how the current systems are being overwhelmed and how coming together collaboratively, as you are doing, can provide opportunities for policy strategies that can redirect people in new ways without compromising public safety. I realize I sort of ran through that fairly quickly, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to see what's happening nationally and have an opportunity to ask questions. I'm really very honored to be working with Dr. Oliver and Dr. Wright and Dr. Risby, who have been really working diligently to develop strategies, develop data that I think was presented today for you to be able to digest on what's happening in Georgia, and happy to take any questions as they may arise and as you do ongoing deliberation for your strategic development across Georgia.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was a lot to take in. So, questions for Dr. Pinels? Yes.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive presentation. I represent the probate court, and we handle civil commitments not related to criminal offenses. However, some of our patients do have criminal histories. And so is there any program that speaks to pre-arrest diversion, not an active case, but someone that in crisis acts out criminally?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where a lot of states are looking. We're certainly trying to pass some legislation about that in Michigan. You know, trying to build out AOT, if that person meets the AOT criteria, has been one strategy. Do they meet, you know, a straight civil commitment through probate court model, even though they may have some criminal charges or they may have engaged in some criminal behavior, if it wasn't, you know, violent where there's a necessity to pursue that criminal route. We know that people with mental illness and substance use disorders, especially homeless individuals, are more likely to be arrested for nonviolent crimes than for violent crimes. And so many, and it becomes a real problem. Many of these nonviolent crimes can be nuisance issues for local businesses and communities. And so it can feel like there's no win here in terms of how to help. But some of those civil commitment routes can be a strategy to get upstream to divert people from those criminal processes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Anything else, Dr. Risby, since you've been working with Dr. Parnells, that you think would be helpful for us to ask?
No, I just appreciate Dr. Parnells helping us put this in perspective. We thought that we were at one point incompetent, questioning whether our ability to actually do this job. And she made it real clear to us that we're not alone, and we're in better shape than some, as scary as it is. We just don't want to get, we want to get ahead of this and turn the tide. And it really has been reassuring to hear our perspective and look at the various different options that are being explored in other states and seeing what will work for us here in Georgia.
Right.
I guess one thing I would say to Dr. Risby too is, and to you all, is the data that they presented is not to be minimized. That took a ton of work to pull together to tell a coherent story for Georgia. And I think, you know, data-driven decision-making is really going to be important. There are programs that Georgia is investing in and putting a lot of money in. If they are working, great. If they are not working, don't keep funding them. You know, try different strategies and try them along a lot of different lines. And so I think that's a very important thing. You know, the states really have not figured, the systems have not figured this out. There's so much complexity around funding mechanisms, local government, county government, you know, municipal, county, state, federal rules, grant funding. There's so much complexity to the strategies and solutions for each community. But what is important is to, I think, really continue to track your data to see if your data, you know, I asked when we went in one of our meetings, we looked at, you know, what are all the influences of things that might be happening in Georgia, and where can you see some bang for your buck, so to speak, as you build out these programs and services. I think it's really important to do that through a data, some qualitative reviews and quantitative reviews.
Thank you. Very helpful. All right. The next thing on our agenda looks like future discussion items, but really it's to ask the folks that are here, Marilyn Leak and Hallie Fader-Tao, who don't have a presentation there, but they're going to tell us what they've been doing in their work, which is also nationwide, and give us some ideas of where they could help us in the future. So, Marilyn, who's going to talk? We're going to put you on the screen so we can see you.
Hallie, that'll be coming from Hallie.
Hallie's going to talk. Okay.
Hey, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, it has been a really impressive presentation so far this morning. As Dr. Peinels noted, a lot of states do not have the data pulled together and organized in the way that we saw this in the presentations we just saw and in the materials that were shared for this meeting. And I think that that's really worth celebrating as an important, I know it's not the first step, it's one of many initial steps to put together a common understanding of what's happening so that you can be identifying a range of strategies as you talked about this morning. So as Dr. Peinels mentioned, we have worked together on a national advisory group, actually a couple of national advisory groups, one of which led to the development of a report called Just and Well, Rethinking How States Approach Competency to Stand Trial. And that was jointly released by our organization, the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Center for State Courts, the American Psychiatric Association Foundation. And it has 10 strategies, and I see in what was developed already the same spirit of bringing together different stakeholders, identifying different drivers, and really looking critically at where there are opportunities for community-based care rather than referrals for competency to stand trial evaluations and restoration. So we really stand ready to work with this group on areas where we can be a value add. In particular, we have been supporting the Courts and Corrections Subcommittee of the Commission, looking at familiar faces for the last year and have a sense of different programs in Georgia, as well as nationwide, for people who have frequent contact with the criminal justice system, with mental health, homeless services. So I think what we would welcome questions, as well as places where, working together with Dr. Peinels and the others here on where we can be helpful in bringing you all information to help make strong decisions for Georgia. So I will stop there. We'll make sure that you have a copy of that report, and we'll see if there are questions.
Okay. She's going to get us a copy of the report. And Hallie, one of the things I would like to see, and it's in our list for next, I think, well, I don't know if it is or not, but we have on this committee or advisory committee, we have judges from Superior Court, which is felony. We have judges from state court, which is misdemeanor, and we have judges from probate court, as well as prosecutors and defense attorneys. So I'd really like to see us look at the different systems in a way that we can make suggestions. We can't lump them all together. We really need to see some differences. I have years of working with Dr. Bailey, and she constantly talked about the differences between misdemeanors and felonies and how we could treat them differently in the system. And I think that's something we might want to look at. So anything you can do to help us with nationwide, those, I think Dr. Peinels already said, there are some states that have looked at misdemeanors and how to pull them out and have a different system. So I think anything you can help us and show us that's happening across the country would be very helpful. And then to Judge Johnson, who already asked about probate court, that assisted outpatient treatment piece and what other pieces probate court has played in other states would be helpful information for us. I feel like the next meeting is still going to be information gathering and try to plug it into some statistics that you have already given us, Dr. Risby. So hopefully we can do that before we start, making grand gestures about what we should suggest happens in the legislature. But so does that sound something you could help us do?
Absolutely.
Okay. I would like to see that, and I would love to have other people ask what they would like to see. Speak up. committee members.
I just know from the state court standpoint, obviously misdemeanors are different and we first of all want to get them out of jail as quickly as we can, or not let them go to jail if there's a diversion type program or whatever that we can use. But it's definitely a problem that we have. And of course, a lot of times we are dealing with misdemeanors where at least the criminal element is not what it might be on the felony side. So there's definitely a reason to treat state court and probate court and superior court differently, it would seem to me.
Fulton
I have
County.
one other, I guess sort of, I don't know if it's possible. I hope you all can hear me. But I recall there was a time when we would request competency evaluations that they included, I guess, suggestions for maybe appropriate resolutions. And I understand that that had to be shortened because of the great volume. But if we're looking for, I guess, alternatives that might be to hospitalization, that might be something, if it were included, then we maybe perhaps have some guidance for maybe perhaps local options.
So how to treat somebody separately than sending them to the hospital for restoration, but what could be an option for them? Yeah. What are some
Because
treatment options?
when I was a prosecutor, I remember when people would get evaluations, they would include sort of, okay, this is what you're dealing with, and this kind of what would be helpful to address it. That I understand why that had to be changed, because they couldn't keep up the volume, so it was just competent or not competent. But I think sometimes that's not exactly, it's not as helpful as the ones that we used to get. Especially if we're going to say, okay, we only have this number of beds, but if we have these other options, maybe we can, or suggestions, then perhaps we could look at some local options that might help divert.
And I think that definitely falls into the difference maybe between misdemeanors and felonies too, because the misdemeanors might be more amenable to, let's just figure out the treatment, not worry about whether they're competent so much. Judge Porter, you wanted to jump in too?
Yes, good morning. One of the things that we have challenges with in misdemeanor court is we have 12 months. And even when they're determined incompetent to stand trial, we can't hold them beyond what their sentence is. And oftentimes the state is not willing to dismiss the charges because we have to also protect the community as well. So we're kind of between a rock and a hard spot. If we had somewhere to commit them, there may be options for us to do something with them. And the second challenge we have a pre-diversion program where if they complete our misdemeanor mental health court, the Solicitor General will dismiss the charges. But the biggest issue is medication, Dr. Risby. We can't make anyone take medication. And the people who are not medicated, they continue to go to the same location, 4 and 5 criminal trespass, continue to fight with their parents and caregivers. And the biggest issue is 12 months. And no one has given us any help or anything that we can do because our window of time is so short. But I can say that if we had some inpatient facilities and some options for people in misdemeanor mental health court, I do believe that it would significantly reduce the felony division, because a lot of the ones that we cannot help or cannot keep in the system, they eventually end up with felonies in superior court.
Right. And I think that would, Hallie, that would be helpful in looking at the differences between felonies and misdemeanors in other states, and have some of those states found ways to take their misdemeanors and perhaps plug them into the probate court system, or what have they done to help with that, so that there is longer term care maybe, or treatment, or because the medication piece is big. It's big. Yeah. Yes.
I had a question for Dr. Risby. Sir, with the closing of Atlanta Medical Center, that only leaves Grady in Fulton County as being the only receiving facility for mental health, for orders to apprehend, and just wanted to try to tie in with the reductions of hospitals nationwide, or so I've heard. Is this impacting nationwide? Well, we're speaking just on Georgia. Is this a statewide issue that we're seeing with the closing of receiving facilities.
So we're trying to encourage the probate court to use the community service boards, the crisis centers, they're all emergency receiving facilities. But if the order is written for a state hospital, we have to figure out a way to admit that person. There's, we have to go over census, but we have to obey the order. Now, we may not think the person needs to be admitted, but we will evaluate them and take it from there.
We'll talk offline.
You don't have a community service board.
Yeah, I've heard that. Okay, well, there can be plenty of side conversations, I think.
Also, I
Yes.
have a quick comment as it relates to felonies in Superior Court. I mean, there are some felonies that are low-level felonies, like your terroristic threats, or the willful obstruction that could possibly be a misdemeanor, but it ends up in Superior Court. So I think there is room for diversion as it relates to that type of felony. What are other states doing? I think that would be
Okay, so we'll add that to our
something, yeah.
list for Hallie and Dr. Pinos maybe to help us with.
Curious what other states for the population that's incompetent and not restorable, that now takes up 300 some odd beds in DBHDD hospitals. What are other states doing with those, I guess, longer term committed folks? I think the rule that we follow is they can be committed into the hospital as long as whatever their highest level charge, whatever the penalty is for that. So in Georgia, we obviously have a lot of wide ranging sentences. So other states, how are they dealing with that when, they're
Right.
not going to be restored ever?
Yeah, that'd be another good piece to understand. So we'll add that to our list.
I think what they're doing when the length of time for the crime has expired, then it's moved over to probate to see if the person meets civil commitment from that standpoint.
Okay, Mr. Cranford, you have a question online too?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, did the doctor say that I think like 80% of people ordered for competency by the court come back as competent, not in need of restoration? And if I misremembered that, I'd be curious to know what that number is, because at least in my experience, a large percentage of the cases ordered for competency evaluation in my circuit come back as competent. And so I'd be interested in a discussion about, is it possible for the trial court to be given the power to have more scrutiny over that? I think I understand the position defense attorneys are in where, they just got to err on the side of asking for it. And I think judges, in large part, just order it when the defense attorney asks for it, even if kind of both parties don't really think the person's incompetent. And so I guess I'd be curious about a discussion about reducing the number of people referred for a competency evaluation. I just haven't heard that as part of the conversation yet.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Dr. Rizzo, was that the
Sure.
statistic?
So it's two different groups. So there's the group that already been found incompetent to stand trial. They've been evaluated and they're on the wait list. And once they come into the hospital, say 85% of those are restored to competence.
Are restored to competency.
Right.
Okay.
The other group are the ones for the initial evaluation. And we were just looking at this data recently. On average, if we look at everybody, it's in the high 60% of people who we get an order for that are turned out to be competent. If you look at it from those individuals with serious crimes, 70% of them are competent when we do the evaluation. If you look at low-level crimes, about half of them are competent because they're too mentally ill to do a real crime. And so it's the sicker people
That is interesting.
that messes up the statistics, if you will. And so it looks like we only looks like 65 or 67% of people who we get a court order for, we feel they are competent. But if we just did serious felonies, it'll be a higher percentage.
That are competent.
That are competent. It's the
It's
people that are
fascinating.
incompetent have done the low level crimes because they're mentally ill. They just not
Okay.
ready.
Well, all the more reason to look at the misdemeanor folks and figure out what we can do with them as well. And I mean, we still get people that get, I'm sorry, we still get
go ahead.
people in the jail who are committing crime, you know, they're in jail for something, but then they rack up, you know, 5 more cases because they keep hitting the water system, sprinkler system or whatever it is. So,
I'll give you 2 quick cases, and I'll just combine them because they're very similar. These 2 gentlemen, their biggest crime was they were homeless at the Atlanta airport. They had multiple arrests. And so they, you know, police asking them to leave, and they invite the police out to fight and pull, you know, that kind of thing. So the big problem was they were mentally ill. And we had them in Central State Hospital because they were on the wait list, they were incompetent, and they were very sick. And I made a decision to try to contact Clayton County to say, can you just drop this? I mean, just let us have them. Just drop the charges, let us have them. So they were real curious what we're going to do. I said, if you just let us have them, instead of sending them back to the jail for trial, we will go ahead and get them connected in the community. They both needed disability. They both needed a place to stay. So we kept them both. One of them we had to keep almost 2 years because he was from out of state. So we had to find his birth certificate, and that takes forever. But the good news is we were able to get both of them on disability. We put them in a housing program, and we haven't seen them since. And the good news is that we put them in a county that was not connected to MARTA, so they didn't have a way to get back to the airport. So they're homeless now is because they're somewhere other than at the airport. But my understanding, just before COVID, I was asking about these guys, and at that point, they'd been well over a year that they were still in that placement that they were at. And so we were considering at one point trying to develop a misdemeanor unit so that we would have social workers that were dedicated just to do that, because all of this discharge planning doesn't happen until the court says you could discharge them.
right.
So
right.
all of this trying to get the birth certificate and all this other kind of stuff, the social workers don't do that for someone who's going to go back to jail. And these gentlemen went back to jail, signed time served, and within months they've been back at the airport and back with us. So that's just a case history of 2 people that stayed in a hospital 1 to 2 years. And then we have people with felonies waiting to get in. So we're
Yeah.
trying to figure out what to do with those folks.
Right.
In court.
Yeah. Okay. So last thing I want to say is one of the things we wanted to discuss. Thank you, Judge Bruden. For next time, and I think that this was brought up by Mr. Cranford, a current method for determining whether to issue an order for competency evaluation. So when do we, I think judges don't feel like we have a choice. Somebody brings it up, we have to do it. And it would be nice to know in other states, Hallie and Dr. Pinels, whether is there any midway step there where judges had some authority to look at it more, or there was a criteria that the lawyers had to fill out other than just, I think my client needs it. So that would be interesting to know. That would give us some information about that process. And then we have all these other things that we just mentioned. So how are our nationwide folks doing on taking notes for next time? Holly or Dr. Pinels?
Yeah, happy to. I was just thinking, pulling this group's comments together in a list of questions would be really great, because you may have others that you think about after you leave the presentation, but we've heard, how do you reduce, do any other states reduce the number of evaluations ordered? What is the mechanism? Are there opportunities for earlier diversion when those cases come in? And I can think of a couple of state examples as you're rolling off these questions. But if you want to pull together that list, and Hallie and I worked together on a number of different things. I actually didn't know she was going to be here, so it's wonderful to see her. And I can work also with Dr. Risby and Oliver and Wright around some of the things that they're doing to give you some ideas.
Great. Well, it sounds like we have some good expert help and wonderful folks at DBHCD to help us. So And I think that would be great. So in the next few weeks, if you think of something, if you're on the committee and you say, this is a question I want answered, or I would like addressed, and we'll try to be very intentional about sorting those and organizing those and putting those down for our folks. I'm hoping to have another meeting within the next maybe 6 weeks, 7 weeks. I know summer is difficult, but hopefully we can do that, especially when we have this great opportunity to use Zoom with somebody that actually handles it as opposed to me. Yay. So is that work for everybody, that timeline? I don't have I didn't come with an idea. So if you have some day that doesn't work specifically for you, if you would let Chelsea know, and then we'll try to come up with a date that is the best for everybody. Okay. Is that good? We'll send a poll. Because I don't know the answer to that.
So whatever date you all tell me, I won't set anything on that date. Like today, I had already set it, but I was able to rejuggle it. So if we know when it is, I just won't put anything on that morning. So
well, some of us do our calendars a year ahead. So like me.
I know I stopped that. It was too hectic to change it. So I do 6 months.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, so we'll have to do the poll is probably a good option. Chelsea can send that out pretty quickly.
What do they call a doodle poll? The doodle anymore? Or they call something?
Don't work.
Would it be helpful if we can all agree that perhaps it's a early morning meeting or lunchtime meeting so that there can be some sort of expectancy? If we're doing the next meeting via Zoom, perhaps at 12:30, just lunch Zoom. That way that gives everyone an opportunity.
I
Hopefully
think
everyone.
given
takes
my
lunch.
history with some of the other committees in this, the behavioral health, et cetera, 2 hours is probably what we should expect. And so knowing when to do that, I mean, I'm easy to figure it out. If we wanted it to be lunch, it could be like 11 to 1, and then people could eat if they wanted to. I thought about having one of the meetings in Gainesville, so that people that wanted to show up could, and I do think it's helpful to have people in person if at all possible.
Great.
But I know this is a statewide committee, so it's hard to drive somewhere for 5 hours for a 2-hour meeting and then have to drive back. So I'm glad we have the technology to include everybody. I mean, if everybody wants to do sort of middle of the day, 11 to 1, we can look at that. Does that sound like a consensus?
No.
Okay. I can't ever do Thursdays, so you can't look at Thursdays for me. But other than that, I'm willing to shift schedules. Okay. Thursday's a mental health court day. It takes up the whole day now. So. Judge Friesman, are you still on?
I am, yes.
Did you have any questions, and what works for you too?
Thursdays don't work for me either. I'm in the same boat as you. But otherwise, yeah, 11 to 1. I was going to point out that I tried doing some state, doing some things on some committees back before the pandemic, and trying to do it from Savannah, doing it virtually was like worthless. I remember going, and it was very uncomfortable, and you really couldn't do it. And it's just an amazing change.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm part of the world now.
Well, I'm very excited to have you and Judge Darasaw, who are far away.
Maybe
Mr. Cranford too. I can't remember where he's coming from, but a ways away.
One of the things I was thinking as we were doing it too, I wonder about from our people that can look and see the other states, would it be too wild to also consider looking a little bit to what they're doing in other places in the world, even, that for whatever reason, whether, I don't know, does Denmark have something incredible, or does
Okay, well, we can ask them if they know.
It just seems like sometimes a paradigm shift, just in exactly how things are happening. You never know what there might be somewhere else.
Hallie and Dr. Pinels, are you willing to sort of give us any outside of the U.S. information you might have?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, there might be a little wild, but I don't know. My husband had an opportunity to visit a jail in Europe, and And when he came back and talked to me about it, I kept telling him, I don't know where the mentally ill people are. And he kept saying that, no, this, you know, and he was explaining how it was all happening. I went, no, the truly, truly sick people you did not see, you could not have. And I don't know whether they just have some magic way of doing it, or whether he just wasn't seeing what they were cleansing, what he was seeing. I don't know.
Okay.
Question.
Yes.
As we proceed with this committee work, are there any conferences or any other trainings that may enhance our discussions? So that
I don't know. I think we're on a limited time schedule. And so I'm not sure how much investigation we can do. I think we have to rely on people to come to us. My understanding, and Commissioner left, but I understand that he kind of wants us to have something by the end of the year to see if we can present anything for the legislative session for 2024. So we may not have time to wander about, although that would be fun and I would enjoy learning, but I think maybe we need to rely on these folks to tell us more information. All right. But I certainly want to see that report that Hallie mentioned. And so we'll get that. Is there anything else? We'll get the poll out. We'll find out a time. We'll set a date. We'll get it as soon as possible so Judge Porter can do her schedule. Anything else before we let everybody go? And you know, we hit 2 hours. We had to start late, so we're all right. Thank you. All right.